The lobby of Horizon Enterprises hummed with life, a strange mix of the usual corporate efficiency and the chaotic energy of children running through the gleaming atrium. Balloons bobbed against the ceiling, tethered to polished chrome railings, and tables were dotted with coloring sheets, science kits, and tiny activity stations. The usually pristine space smelled faintly of fresh coffee and the sugary tang of cupcakes, a surreal clash that mirrored the anticipation crackling in the air. Parents hovered near their children, checking schedules, snapping photos, and whispering reminders about behavior, while staff members navigated the crowds with practiced smiles. Near the grand windows that framed the city skyline, Robert Maxwell stood like a statue carved from steel and composure. His dark suit was impeccable, each fold and crease seemingly untouched by the bustle around him. At 58, his presence commanded attention. His gaze swept the room with the precision of a man who had spent decades making calculated decisions, weighing consequences, and asserting control. To anyone observing, Robert was the quintessential billionaire CEO, unapproachable, meticulous, and revered. Yet behind his disciplined posture there flickered something far less tangible. A memory, a whisper of a life long paused. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve absent-mindedly, staring out at the flood of children being shepherded by parents, and for a fleeting moment, his jaw softened. A shadow of loss, a fragment of regret hovered in his expression, invisible to all but those who knew to look. Across the lobby, Lisa Parker held her daughter's small hand tightly, her knuckles white. The 8-year-old clung to her mother's side, absorbing the sights, sounds, and subtle vibrations of the building with a focus most adults lacked. Lily's hearing aids, sleek and discreet, captured fragments of sound, a laughter here, the click of heels there, but her true strength lay in her eyes. They missed nothing. She noted the tilt of a head, the frown of a brow, the way a boy's gaze lingered on the floating balloons. Her small mind catalogued it all with a precision that made her mother both proud and anxious. Today, Lily was facing strangers far more imposing than the school principal or the dentist, strangers who shaped empires. The thought made her stomach flutter, but she held her head high, her determination reflected in the tight curl of her fingers around Lisa's. "Remember what I taught you," Lisa whispered, bending to Lily's height, her hands moving in deliberate, precise motions. The secret sign, practiced 100 times in their quiet apartment, danced silently between them. Lily's eyes tracked her mother's fingers, committing the gesture to memory once again. Her small lips pressed together as she nodded, the seriousness of the task settling over her like a heavy cloak. Lisa's heart wrenched with worry and hope. 5 years of struggle had brought them here, and she prayed that this delicate plan would not fail. At that moment, Robert Maxwell stepped forward onto a small riser placed in the center of the lobby. The room's chatter dimming to a murmur as all eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat, his deep voice resonating through the space with a calm authority that silenced the hum of excitement. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the clusters of children. "I'm particularly interested in meeting each of you, especially those of you between the ages of 7 and 9. I want to spend time individually with each child in that range." The staff exchanged glances, eyebrows raised in curiosity. Parents whispered, puzzled, and a ripple of suspense ran through the room. Why 7 to 9? What could a man like Robert Maxwell hope to learn from these children? Lily's pulse quickened. The words rang clear in her mind, amplified by the vibrations through the floorboards, and she stiffened with anticipation. Her mother's hands found hers once more, the silent sign reminding her of the mission ahead, of the secret that could change everything. Lily squared her shoulders, a nervous determination shining in her bright blue eyes, the first true hint of the connection that had waited decades to be revealed. The apartment was small, its walls lined with the evidence of a life stretched thin. Unpaid bills stacked like paper cliffs on the kitchen counter, a few scattered toys that seemed almost out of place amid the chaos, and the persistent hum of the city that pressed in through the thin windows. Lisa Parker moved through the cramped space with deliberate calm, masking the storm of anxiety that churned beneath her measured exterior. Today was no ordinary day. Today the impossible felt just within reach, and the weight of it pressed against her chest in a way she hadn't felt in years. Lily sat at the edge of the couch, her legs swinging slightly, eyes darting from her mother's hands to the calendar pinned above the fridge. She had counted down the days, the hours even, and now the moment had arrived. The little girl's hearing aids sat snug behind her ears, their delicate devices allowing her just enough perception to feel the vibrations of the world around her, yet never fully hearing it. She had learned to read lips, to watch expressions, to translate the faintest quiver of a mouth or a flicker of an eye into meaning. Today that skill would be more than a gift. It would be their lifeline. Lisa knelt before her daughter, tracing invisible lines in the air as she began the rehearsal once more. Every gesture had to be precise. One slip, one hesitation, and the secret could be lost. Remember, she signed, her movements smooth but urgent, only if you are alone with him. No one else can see. Not a soul. Lily mirrored her actions with careful attention, her small hands forming the arcane pattern with exacting precision. This was no ordinary sign language. It was their private code, forged from months of practice and whispered fears. Lisa's mind flickered to the past, to the accident that had changed everything. The hospital room, the beeping machines, the emptiness after David's death. Raising Lily had been a battle fought daily against grief, against bills, against the crushing weight of being a single mother to a child with special needs. And now, 5 years later, the stakes had shifted but not diminished. The eviction notice had been shoved in her face only yesterday. The medical bills piled higher than her resolve. This meeting, this day, was more than a mere formality. It was a chance to reclaim a future that had slipped through her fingers. Outside, the bus rumbled along the city streets, carrying mother and daughter toward the glass towers of Horizon Enterprises. Lily pressed her tiny hand against the window, watching reflections of towering buildings stretch and twist, catching glimpses of people who moved with purpose she could only imagine. Her stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation, a tight coil of both fear and excitement. She had never been to the building where her mother once worked, a place that had seemed like a fortress of power and ambition. And today, somehow, she would enter that fortress, armed only with a secret gesture and the courage inherited from a lifetime of careful observation. Lisa glanced at her daughter, the small determination etched in Lily's features, and allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. "You are ready," she signed, voice barely a whisper, though her eyes spoke volumes. "Just remember the sign, only if he is alone." Lily nodded, the blue of her eyes burning with solemn understanding. Meanwhile, atop the towering floors of Horizon Enterprises, Robert Maxwell was moving through his own private storm. He stood in the quiet of his penthouse office, staring out over the city with the calm, measured patience of a man used to controlling every detail. And yet, for all his power, there was a disquiet he could not shake. The announcement earlier, his own sudden, inexplicable decision to meet children aged 7 to 9 individually, had seemed almost impulsive, even reckless, in his own mind. Yet a thread deep inside him, long buried, urged him toward this peculiar choice. He reached for the photograph on his desk, a woman with honey-colored hair and laughter caught forever in a frozen frame, and for a moment, the steel of his demeanor cracked. The years, the decisions, the losses all collided in a fleeting wave of emotion. If she had a child, he thought, a grandchild perhaps, how old would they be now? And more importantly, would they even know? The thought gnawed at him, unsettling and urgent, like a phantom tugging at the edges of his meticulous life. As the elevator doors closed behind Lisa and Lily, carrying them toward the gleaming lobby and the uncertain destiny that awaited, the city seemed to hold its breath. Every footstep on the polished floors, every child's squeal, every fluttering balloon became a pulse in a living, breathing tension that stretched taut from mother to daughter, from billionaire to stranger. The stage was set, the players in place, and one small sign, a movement of tiny hands, held the power to unravel decades of secrets and reshape the lives of everyone involved. The lobby of Horizon Enterprises was a cathedral of glass and steel, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows and scattering across the polished marble floors. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, a blurred mosaic of movement and noise, but inside, time seemed to slow for Lisa Parker as she stepped through the revolving doors. The grandeur of the space was almost suffocating, the sheer height of the ceilings, the gleam of chrome railings, the hush that fell whenever Robert Maxwell moved through it, even when he was still invisible behind closed office doors. Lisa's hand tightened around Lily's, a silent anchor against the swirl of chaos around them. Children darted past, shrieking with excitement, some trailing balloons that bobbed like errant clouds while parents trailed behind, trying to corral them. Staff members moved with clipboard efficiency, directing families from station to station, their voices calm but brisk, almost mechanical. Every movement seemed choreographed, every glance calculated, but Lisa knew better. In this controlled world of power and precision, a single misstep could erase the fragile thread of opportunity that had brought them here. Security eyed them as they approached the check-in desk. A young guard, crisp in uniform, scrutinized Lisa's name badge. "Parker, I don't see you on the employee list," he said, brow furrowed, suspicion threading his tone. Her pulse quickened, and for a fleeting heartbeat, panic clawed at her chest. "I'm a former employee," she said smoothly, keeping her voice calm, even as the blood hammered in her ears. "I worked as Mr. Maxwell's executive assistant 5 years ago." She offered a tight smile, praying that the recognition would be enough. Recognition came. The guard's expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "Ah, right. You're the one," he stopped himself from letting go back then. "Well, nice to see you back. And this must be your daughter?" Lily stepped forward, a tentative smile playing on her lips. She had watched her mother rehearse the introduction countless times, and she mirrored the calm confidence Lisa projected. Though her small hands twitched nervously, her eyes sharp and observant swept the room, absorbing the environment, the hovering staff, the hovering parents, the subtle tension that seemed to pulse just beneath the surface of every smile. The guard waved them through, and the pair moved deeper into the heart of the building. The lobby seemed to stretch endlessly, a labyrinth of glass partitions and mirrored reflections. Balloon clusters floated like silent sentinels above activity tables adorned with robotics kits, science experiments, and miniature art projects. The air was thick with the mingling scents of coffee, paper, and children's laughter, a sensory overload that pressed Lily's heightened awareness to its limits. She felt every vibration of the floor beneath her shoes, every subtle tremor as heels clicked across marble, every faint whisper of conversation that filtered through her hearing aids. And then she saw him. Robert Maxwell emerged from behind a partition, flanked by Caroline and 2 security aides, moving through the room with the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed without question. Even from across the lobby, his presence was magnetic, cold, precise, commanding. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, calculating, assessing, measuring the weight of every small hand that extended toward him. Every gesture, every tilt of a head, every hesitant smile was catalogued and filed in the vault of his mind. Lily caught the flicker of something else in his gaze, a subtle hesitation, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart race. Lisa pulled her daughter behind a display board, the shadows hiding them from view. "There," she signed quickly, her hands trembling slightly despite her calm exterior. "The tall man in the suit. Remember the sign, only if he's alone." Lily nodded, her blue eyes wide, intense, and unnervingly focused. She crouched slightly, the weight of the secret she carried pressing against her small frame. Her mother's voice, silent yet present through motion, reminded her that this was more than a game, more than a school exercise. The man she was about to meet was connected to a history she barely understood, a history that could unravel or remake their lives in an instant. Robert moved closer, unaware of the tiny, calculating eyes that followed his every movement. His attention was split between the bustling children and some far-off memory only he could see. The faintest quiver of recognition flickered in his features as he paused near a robotic station, watching a small boy fumble with a motorized car. No one else noticed it. It was subtle, almost buried in decades of habit, but Lily noticed something about him. The tension in his shoulders, the precision in his gaze hinted at a hidden vulnerability. She pressed herself closer to the board, heart hammering. The time was almost here. The secret sign, the culmination of months of preparation and silent practice, would have to be perfect. One misstep, one misread glance, and the moment would pass, leaving the door to their future closed again. Every nerve in her small body screamed with anticipation, and even as Lisa's reassuring presence loomed beside her, the enormity of what was about to happen settled over them like a storm cloud, electric with suspense. The billionaire moved closer still, methodical, oblivious to the tiny figure preparing to alter the course of his life. The air seemed to thicken, every sound and movement magnified, and then, just as his back was turned for the briefest second, Lily lifted her hands, the practice pattern flowing seamlessly from mind to motion. It was silent, almost imperceptible, yet charged with meaning. Time seemed to stretch, every heartbeat echoing in the vast lobby as destiny, long deferred, leaned in to claim its place. The world seemed to narrow around Lily Parker. Behind the display board, the chatter of children, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant clatter of heels on marble, all of it receded into a muffled, distant echo. Her tiny frame tensed, muscles coiled like springs, every fiber attuned to the single moment that would define what came next. She had rehearsed this 100 times in the quiet of her apartment, in the stillness of her bedroom under the watchful eyes of her mother. Now it was no longer rehearsal. The stakes were higher, heavier, almost unbearably real. Robert Maxwell moved like a predator through the cluster of children and parents, scanning each face with meticulous precision. He shook small hands, smiled faintly at polite bows, and assessed every interaction with a critical, unyielding gaze. Yet there was a subtle change in him today, imperceptible to most. A slight hesitation, a micro flicker in the corner of his eye when a child handed him a drawing, betrayed a crack in the armor of control he had spent decades building. Something was stirring beneath the surface, an echo of the past that he had long buried beneath contracts, board meetings, and billion-dollar acquisitions. Lily's pulse thrummed like a drum in her chest, her fingers poised in the secret configuration her mother had taught her. She watched Robert's back, memorizing the slope of his shoulders, the cadence of his steps, the way his head tilted ever so slightly as he focused on the children before him. In that tilt, she recognized the vulnerability, the gap in the fortress of his persona. And that gap, tiny, fleeting, almost imperceptible, was where she had to strike. Lisa crouched beside her, tension etched into every line of her body. Her fingers brushed Lily's arm in a silent, grounding reassurance. "Remember, only if he's alone," she signed with painstaking precision, her eyes locking on her daughter's. Lily nodded once, sharply, a signal of readiness and resolve. The room around them continued its orchestra of controlled chaos. But for Lily, it was as if time had slowed, every second stretching into eternity. Robert stepped aside for a moment, his attention captured by a parent struggling to calm a wailing toddler. The briefest pause, less than a heartbeat, was all Lily needed. She lifted her hands, letting them flow through the complex pattern she had memorized. Her movements were fluid, precise, a silent language that carried a weight far beyond her small frame. The pattern was subtle, delicate, almost invisible to anyone else. But it carried a meaning that spanned decades, a bridge between past and present, a key to a truth long hidden. Robert froze mid-step, the cup of coffee in his hand trembling ever so slightly, his face drained of color, the faintest sheen of sweat forming at his temple. His eyes widened, disbelief and recognition warring across the sharp planes of his face. The world seemed to tilt around him, voices dimming to a distant hum, the laughter of children curdling into silence. Every memory he had tried to lock away, the laughter of a young woman with honey blonde hair, the photograph he kept hidden in the drawer of his office, the shadow of regret that had haunted him for decades, flashed through his mind in an instant. He staggered slightly, as though the very air had shifted under his feet. Lily's small eyes, bright and unwavering, held his gaze. There was no hesitation in her expression, only clarity, purpose, and a courage that struck him like a physical blow. The realization crashed into him with such force that he could barely breathe. This was no ordinary child. This was someone connected to a past he had thought lost forever, someone who carried the living echo of a life he had abandoned, a secret that had haunted him across 30 long years. Lisa held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears, knowing that the smallest misstep now could undo everything. Yet she dared not move, dared not intervene. Lily had taken the leap, and the moment was irrevocable. Robert's usual stoicism crumbled. His hands, which had wielded power over billions, now shook with a tremor born of shock and sudden recognition. A ghost of a name, a memory, a love once held too tightly and lost too soon rose in his mind, threatening to overwhelm the meticulously ordered life he had built. The lobby, once noisy and vibrant, felt impossibly still. Children played, balloons floated, parents whispered, but Robert stood frozen, eyes locked on the child who had awakened a truth he had long buried. Lily's sign, delicate and silent, had pulled back the curtain on decades of secrecy, and in that suspended moment the impossible became real. The billionaire, the man who had never allowed vulnerability to touch him, was pale, shaken, undone by a child's quiet courage. Robert Maxwell stood rigid, the polished marble floor beneath his feet seeming suddenly unstable, as if the ground itself had shifted. The city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows blurred into a haze of light and shadow, inconsequential compared to the storm raging within him. His mind raced, fragments of memory colliding with the present, each one sharper, more urgent than the last. The sign, tiny, precise, almost invisible, had triggered something he had long buried. A name, a face, a fleeting laugh from decades ago. It all came rushing back, and with it, a surge of emotions he had spent a lifetime suppressing. Disbelief, longing, regret, and something dangerously close to hope. He gripped the edge of a nearby display table, the faint tremor in his hands betraying a vulnerability that no boardroom, no empire, no fortune had ever exposed. For a man who had built his life on control, order, and meticulous calculation, the sudden intrusion of this child, so impossibly small yet so impossibly significant, was disorienting. He felt as if someone had torn a thread in the tapestry of his life, unraveling patterns he had spent decades perfecting. Lily remained behind the display board, still poised, still unflinching, her blue eyes locked on him with a clarity that belied her 8 years. She could sense the shift in the air, the subtle changes in posture, the rapid intake of breath, the way his eyes seemed to soften and widen simultaneously. Every instinct in her body told her she had done exactly what her mother had taught her. And yet, the weight of the moment pressed down with a gravity that made her small chest rise and fall rapidly. Robert's breath caught in his throat. Memories long buried surged forward in vivid, painful clarity. Madison, honey blonde hair catching the sunlight, laughter ringing through empty corridors, a promise never fulfilled. The child she had borne, a child he had never known, a child now standing before him. He blinked, shaking his head as though to dislodge the impossible from reality. But the certainty of her hands, the deliberate precision of the sign left no room for doubt. She was connected to him, directly, undeniably, and intimately. He stumbled back a step, barely aware of the surrounding lobby, the floating balloons, the cacophony of children. The world contracted into a tunnel that led straight to her. Each heartbeat thundered in his chest like a drum, a warning, a summons. The air around him thickened, charged with tension, electricity, and the raw pulse of destiny. He had spent 58 years building walls around his heart, walls of steel, glass, and contracts, and yet here they were, crumbling under the weight of a child's silent courage. Lisa watched from behind the display, every nerve in her body taut with anticipation. Her hands trembled slightly as she clenched them together, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. Lily had performed perfectly, and now the reaction, the recognition, the shock she had been trained to provoke was unfolding. She saw it in Robert, the color draining from his face, the way his eyes lingered, haunted on her daughter, the flicker of emotion that no one else in the room could have imagined possible in a man of his reputation. Caroline, Robert's assistant, approached cautiously, sensing something had shifted but unable to read the storm brewing behind his eyes. He barely acknowledged her presence, his focus entirely consumed by the child. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of time and memory, connecting dots that had remained isolated for decades. The private investigator's reports, the letters he had never sent, the photograph tucked away in his desk drawer, they all converged in a single, blinding realization. Lily's hands remained poised, her sign complete, the silent language of truth flowing from her fingertips like an unspoken revelation. And then Robert finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper, hoarse with shock and disbelief. It can't be. It's impossible. The lobby seemed to contract around him, as if the world itself recognized the significance of what was unfolding. Children continued to play, parents murmured, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in the room. And yet, for Robert Maxwell, the empire he had built, the control he had wielded, and the life he had meticulously curated all seemed trivial compared to the truth that stood before him. A child, silent, small, yet more powerful than anything he had ever encountered. A tremor passed through him, a mixture of awe, fear, and uncontainable longing. The past had collided with the present in the form of Lily Parker, and the realization struck him with a force that left him pale, vulnerable, and irrevocably changed. The world he knew was over. A new one, uncharted and terrifying, had begun. Robert Maxwell's breath came in uneven, shallow pulls as he stepped back from the display board. The bustling lobby around him, the squeals of children, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint rustle of balloons, faded into an almost surreal silence. Every instinct he had honed over decades screamed for composure, for control, for rational thought. But the moment had slipped beyond the bounds of reason. The child before him, small, silent, and impossibly precise, had breached the fortress he had built around his life. His eyes, dark and intense, tracked Lily's every movement. The subtle flare of her nostrils, the determined set of her chin, the unflinching calm in her gaze. It was all unmistakable. This was not just a child performing a gesture. This was a message, a key, a thread leading directly back to a past he had tried so desperately to lock away. The air between them was electric, heavy with unspoken truths, the weight of decades pressing down on every breath he took. Flashbacks struck him without warning. Madison, her laughter like sunlight on water, her hair catching the breeze in that long-forgotten courtyard. The day she had left, the unsaid words, the letter he never received, the child he never knew. And now, in this impossibly small human, he saw echoes of her, fragments of a life he had abandoned staring straight into his soul. His chest tightened. His carefully constructed world, the contracts, the boardrooms, the empire felt suddenly fragile, irrelevant, like paper in a storm. Lily's hands moved once again, repeating the secret pattern with fluid precision. It was as if the motion itself contained the weight of history, the unspoken connections of blood and memory. Her mother had warned her only if he was alone. But the significance of the moment transcended mere secrecy. It was a bridge spanning decades, connecting what had been lost with what could still be reclaimed. Robert's mind reeled. Each gesture she made forced him to confront pieces of himself he had buried, the love he had forsaken, the promises he had failed to keep, the life he might have had. His eyes watered slightly. Not with grief, not yet, but with a raw, unfiltered shock that no boardroom victory could ever replicate. He tried to speak, to form a sentence, but his throat constricted. Words failed him entirely. The empire he had mastered so thoroughly now seemed irrelevant in the face of this revelation. Lisa watched from behind the board, her knuckles white, her heart hammering as she tried to read Robert's reaction. Every twitch of his face, every shallow breath, every subtle widening of his eyes told her what she dared not hope out loud. He understood. He recognized something he had not allowed himself to hope for in decades. Lily, her daughter, was a living link to a past he had tried to forget but could never truly escape. A sudden tremor passed through him, not of fear but of recognition, of connection. His hands, the same hands that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and shaped empires, shook slightly as he reached toward the air, not knowing whether he was grasping at a memory, a possibility, or a miracle. He saw finally the truth in the child's eyes, a truth so precise, so undeniable that it left him pale, speechless, and unguarded. Lily. His voice was barely audible, hoarse, cracked with disbelief. The name tasted foreign yet familiar on his tongue, a link between past and present he could no longer deny. It can't be. The child's calm, unwavering gaze met his, and in that silence the connection became undeniable. Every detail of her, the eyes, the expression, the unspoken confidence, was a reflection of someone he had loved and lost. A granddaughter he never knew, a secret life intersecting with his present in a way so precise it defied reason. The lobby around them remained oblivious. Parents chatted, children ran in loops, balloons swayed gently in the air currents. But in that small circle behind the display board, time itself seemed suspended. Robert Maxwell, billionaire, titan of industry, master of control, was undone by a single gesture from an 8-year-old girl. The empire he had built, the power he had wielded, the life he had meticulously ordered, all of it collapsed silently in the presence of a truth he could neither deny nor ignore. For the first time in decades he was unarmed, exposed, and profoundly human. The weight of regret, longing, and possibility pressed down on him, a tidal wave of emotion threatening to sweep away everything he had ever known. And yet, beneath the shock and disbelief, a fragile thread of hope began to take root. The possibility of reconnection, of redemption, of reclaiming what had been lost. Robert's gaze never wavered from Lily, And in that suspended moment, the impossible became real. The child before him was more than a child. She was the living embodiment of a past he had thought forever gone, the bridge to a family he had never known, and the key to a future he had never dared to imagine. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Children's laughter, the soft clatter of shoes on marble, the faint rustle of balloons. It all dimmed to a distant echo, irrelevant to the gravity of the moment unfolding. Robert Maxwell stood rigid, eyes locked on the small figure before him, his mind racing faster than any boardroom negotiation, faster than any market crash he had ever faced. He could barely process the sight, the girl poised, fearless and deliberate, repeating the secret gesture that had shattered decades of carefully constructed detachment. Lisa Parker held her breath, hiding just behind the display board, knowing that the culmination of years of planning, practice and quiet desperation hung in the balance. Her knuckles were white, heart hammering as she watched her daughter perform the motion that could change everything. The tiny sign was more than a gesture, it was a key, a map, a bridge between the past and the present, and Robert Maxwell was standing directly in its path. Robert's eyes widened in disbelief. The color draining from his face as recognition struck him with the force of a tidal wave. The child's hands mirrored a pattern he had seen only once before, decades ago, in the careful, deliberate movements of a woman he had loved and lost. Madison. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Her laughter, sunlight catching her honey blonde hair, the fleeting smile that had haunted him for 30 years. And now, this child. He staggered slightly, gripping the edge of a nearby display table as the realization solidified in his mind. The small girl before him was no ordinary child. The curve of her lips, the sharp clarity of her eyes, the exactitude of her motions, all of it screamed a truth he had spent a lifetime trying to bury. Lily Parker was his granddaughter. The daughter of the woman he had loved, lost, and believed he would never see again. Lily. His voice was raw, hoarse, breaking under the weight of shock and disbelief. He reached out almost instinctively, as though the mere act of touching her could make the impossible tangible, make it real. It's you. It has to be. Lily's eyes met his, unwavering, luminous with intelligence and courage beyond her years. She nodded slightly, a quiet affirmation that spoke volumes. And for the first time, Robert Maxwell allowed himself to feel the torrent of emotion that had been buried under decades of control, wealth and meticulous calculation. He saw in her the echo of Madison, the proof of a past he had thought lost forever, and the bridge to a future he had never dared imagine. Tears blurred his vision as he took a tentative step closer, every muscle in his body trembling. The empire he had spent decades building, the billions, the power, the precision, all of it felt suddenly trivial in the face of this revelation. He was unarmed, unshielded, utterly human, and it terrified him. And yet, beneath the fear, a fragile thread of hope unfurled. Lisa emerged from behind the board, her own eyes glistening, and stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Maxwell," she began, but he raised a hand, stopping her. His gaze never left Lily. I need a moment," he murmured, voice trembling. The control he wielded in every other arena had no power here. Lily took a step forward, her small hand reaching toward him, and he mirrored the motion almost instinctively, bridging the distance that 30 years of absence had created. The first touch was tentative, almost hesitant, but it was enough. Enough to anchor reality, enough to confirm that this child, the one who had unknowingly carried a family secret in her small hands, was truly his granddaughter. The crowd in the lobby remained oblivious. Balloons swayed, parents whispered, children laughed, yet in this pocket of time, a billionaire, a mother, and a child were suspended in a moment of revelation so profound it eclipsed the grandeur of the building itself. Robert's stoic, iron-willed persona cracked completely, replaced by raw emotion, disbelief, relief, awe, and a dawning sense of joy he had never allowed himself to feel. He knelt slightly to meet Lily at eye level, his voice soft now, almost reverent. I thought I had lost you before I even knew you existed," he whispered. You're my family, my granddaughter." Tears spilled down Lisa's cheeks as she watched the reunion, a mixture of relief and wonder flooding through her. The eviction notices, the medical bills, the struggles of the past 5 years, they all faded into insignificance against the miracle unfolding before her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt hope, pure and untethered. as the fractured pieces of a family long separated began to reassemble. Lily's small hands reached up to touch his cheek, and Robert closed his eyes, letting the connection wash over him. Every scar, every regret, every lost opportunity melted in that single moment. The billionaire, the master of empires, was transformed not by power, wealth, or influence, but by love rediscovered, by a silent gesture from a child who carried the weight of a family secret with grace and courage. The lobby around them resumed its ordinary rhythm. But for Robert Maxwell, Lisa Parker, and Lily, time had shifted irreversibly. The past had collided with the present, and in the process, a future had been forged. Fragile, uncertain, but filled with possibility. And in that fragile, luminous moment, the impossible became undeniably real.